and welcome to Tenant Action Today, brought to you by Met Council on Housing, the citywide tenants union. If you believe in tenants' rights, if you want to help preserve the affordable housing we have and expand the supply of affordable housing, you have tuned to the right channel. Among other things, you will be able to call in and ask a question about a problem you're having with your landlord or about your rights as a tenant and get an answer from a tenant attorney right here on the air. You will also get some of the latest news of interest to tenant advocates. Finally, you will learn how you can help the campaign to restore our rent protection laws, which are due to expire in a little over 10 months and are in danger of being phased out. My name is Michael McKee. I'm a board member of the Met Council on Housing, and I'm the treasurer of the Tenants Political Action Committee. Throughout the next hour, we're going to give you information about sources of advice and information for tenants. Sometimes this will be on the bottom of the screen, sometimes on the full screen. You might want to get a pen and paper so you can write them down as we go along. Our guest for this program is James Fishman of the tenant law firm Fishman and Mallon. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Mike.
So we were talking before we went on the air about the whole phenomenon of buyouts of rent-regulated apartments and how this does seem to be on the upswing. In fact, there was an article, I believe it was in the Times.
Front page of the Times
in
the last few weeks.
2 weeks ago, yeah.
It's
Are you seeing more
yes.
landlords trying to buy tenants out?
Definitely, it's way back than from where it had been. When the economy was bad, buyouts were not happening because landlords didn't have the cash. But now, the values are so high. The amount of rent that can be gotten for an apartment, particularly Manhattan and most of Brooklyn now. Landlords are throwing tens of thousands of dollars around at people and trying to get those vacancies in any way they can.
And, many people are unaware that it is not illegal for a landlord to offer to buy a tenant out.
Right.
But there are pitfalls.
Well, it's illegal if it goes over the line, and landlords say, you better take this money or else.
Or I'm going to harass you out.
Right, or they start withholding services, or browbeat people. There was another story in the paper about a landlord named Steve Croman who had hired a retired cop who was accused of doing that kind of thing. Yeah,
a retired cop who was showing up at people's apartments pretending to be a plumber or, something that he was not.
Well, and generally harassing people, browbeating people
right.
Who didn't want to take the money that was being thrown at them. But what I get a lot of people who come to my office and ask me, should I do a buyout? Is it worthwhile? And the first thing I ask them is, do you have another place to live? Because if you don't, you're going to spend whatever they're going to offer you pretty quickly on somewhere else.
You're going to pay a lot more than what you're paying now.
If you're giving up a below-market apartment, you're going to be paying a lot more each month. And that money is going to go away rather quickly, and there are tax consequences to that money as well.
People don't realize you have to pay tax on that. It's taxable income.
Well, there's a dispute over whether it's ordinary income or if it's capital gains income, but still, it is taxable income in one way or the other, and you have to take that into account. So even if a landlord's offering $100,000, which seems like a huge amount of money, if you end up paying $2,500 a month and you were paying $1,000 a month, that $100,000 isn't going to last you forever, and it's not going to, especially after you pay your taxes on it.
Or if you're paying $1,000 a month and you're going to rent a new apartment for $3,000 a month, it's really not going to last long.
It's going to last you 4 years.
Yeah,
the extra $2,000 a month, and that's without taxes. So people have to really be fully aware of what they're getting into. I have clients who come to me who are leaving the city, and they're just moving somewhere else for whatever reason. They're retiring, they're going to Florida or Arizona or whatever it is, and they don't expect to have to pay as much to live somewhere else, or they're moving in with a family member, or they're getting married and their spouse has an apartment that they're going to move into. There's all kinds of reasons why giving up that apartment isn't such a big deal, but if you don't have any other place to go, it is a big deal.
But if the impetus for the buyout comes from the tenant, if the tenant approaches the landlord and says, "I'd be interested in your buying me out," then the tenant has a lot less leverage.
Of course.
If the landlord wants you out because he has plans for the building or...
It's
whatever.
usually not a good idea for the tenant to initiate the discussion.
Yeah.
Because the landlord is going to interpret that as this tenant is already halfway out the door already.
So why should I pay them
I'll
anything?
just wait.
Right.
So it's always better for leverage purposes to have the landlord approach the tenant first.
I always advise tenants in this situation, in addition to advising them, think carefully whether you really want to take a buyout.
Right.
Well,
I'll give you an example
attorney,
of one that I have now. I have a client who is now in his 70s, who's been in a rent-controlled apartment on the Upper East Side for 35 years or 40 years, and it's on the 5th floor, and it's a walk-up.
That's hard, yeah.
And he is saying to me, look, I can't walk up those stairs every day anymore. And even though I'm only paying $500 a month, I'd really like to live somewhere else. And he happens to have somewhere else to live. So he's a good candidate for a buyout. I mean, both physically, he's having trouble.
You have to weigh the circumstances, and
Exactly.
each case is different. I always advise tenants, don't try to negotiate this kind of thing yourself. Get a tenant lawyer. Because there are too many pitfalls, and people get cheated out of the money.
Yes. I've seen people who moved out and then didn't get the money.
Right.
And that's a big problem. We always require that the money be put in escrow
before the tenant surrenders the apartment.
Well before. And that's just a no-brainer. You have to do that.
But it's amazing to me when people, I hear someone say, oh, I agreed to take $5,000 and move out of my apartment. I've heard this quite recently, actually. It's kind of amazing.
And then they didn't get it, or
no, they actually. I think in that case they got the money.
Yeah.
So, but I mean,
well, for $5,000, it's an absolute bargain for a landlord.
The landlord is way ahead of the game.
Sure.
Okay, before we take calls, a few things that you should know about Met Council on Housing. First, Met Council runs a tenant hotline every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1:30 to 5 p.m. Tenants can call 212-979-0611 and speak to a live counselor. Also, Met Council on Housing has a weekly radio program called Housing Notebook on WBAI FM 99.5 on the FM dial. Housing Notebook is on the radio every Monday from 8 to 9 p.m. You can also listen on the internet at www.wbai.org. Finally, Met Council on Housing publishes the only tenant newspaper in New York City called Tenant Inquilino. Those who become members of Met Council receive the newspaper in the mail every month. An important point, Met Council on Housing is not and has never been affiliated with the Metropolitan Council on Jewish Poverty. They are completely separate organizations. Now, here are some brief news items and announcements of interest to tenants. First, the State Division of Housing and Community Renewal has ruled in favor of the tenants at London Terrace in the ongoing dispute over access to the swimming pool and sun deck. Deciding a complaint filed by the London Terrace Tenants Association, the State Housing Agency has granted rent abatements to the rent-stabilized tenants that will add up to $2 million per year if the tenants are denied access to these facilities that they have enjoyed for many years. The Tenants Association took the position that access to the pool and sun deck are required services, meaning that they are entitled to substantial rent reductions if they no longer have access. The agency agreed. The current arrangement granting the rent-stabilized tenants access to these amenities expires later this month, and negotiations over a resolution are underway. Next, New Yorkers learned last week that Governor Andrew Cuomo has hired a criminal defense lawyer to represent his office in the ongoing fallout from the damaging New York Times article of 2 weeks ago. The article detailed how the governor and his staff manipulated the supposedly independent anti-corruption commission that Cuomo appointed last summer and disbanded in March. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara is investigating whether Cuomo or any of his staff violated any laws in their behind-the-scenes efforts to prevent the Moreland Act Commission from investigating allies and supporters of the governor, most notably the Real Estate Board of New York. The U.S. Attorney has warned Cuomo and his staff that they could potentially be charged with witness tampering or obstruction of justice. Then it came to light that Cuomo is using his $35 million campaign treasury to pay the lawyer. This information brought criticism from good government groups and from State Senator Liz Krueger, who is sponsor of a bill that would prohibit the use of campaign funds to pay attorney fees when politicians are in legal trouble. Finally, the Real Affordability for All Coalition is sponsoring a rally and march on Wednesday, August 20th, to call for stronger protections for tenants, permanent housing for the 60,000 homeless New Yorkers, and a real plan to make the city's public housing habitable. The rally starts at 4:30 p.m. at the First Corinthian Baptist Church, 1912 Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, in other words, 7th Avenue and 116th Street. For more information, get in touch with Met Council on Housing. And we'll put this information up again about the August 20th rally and march later in the program. So, Jamie, we were also, you had you had a great decision recently where one of your clients sued a landlord attorney or a law firm for suing the tenant for rent that the tenant did not owe. Right. And he won. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, the precursor to that was that the landlord sued my client in housing court for non-payment of rent. And my client has a SCRE, or Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption, which means that his rent is frozen at a certain level based upon his age and his income. And so his liability for rent is $400 a month, and the legal rent was $800 a month.
Which the city pays the difference.
Well, the city gives a tax
reduction
to the landlord for the $400.
So they were suing him for the total
yes.
amount.
And he had paid the $400, so they were suing him as if he had paid nothing, and they were suing him for the whole $800. So first we took care of the housing court case, got that discontinued with prejudice, and they had to pay my client's legal fees for the housing court case. And then we filed a lawsuit in federal court against the law firm under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which is a federal law that regulates the conduct of third-party debt collectors. And lawyers who collect rent or seek to collect rent from tenants in housing court are considered to be debt collectors under the federal law. We litigated the case for about a year and a half. There was a lot of motion practice, and there were depositions, and they decided to defend all the way as far as possible, and it ended up costing a lot of time and expense for us to litigate the case. And then the court granted our motion for summary judgment, meaning the court agreed that we were right on the law, that they had violated the statute, and that they didn't have a valid defense to it. And
I seem to remember that part of their defense was that they were relying on the landlord's records, which were inaccurate.
Well, they were just blindly relying on the records.
Right, but they weren't doing any investigation to determine what the truth was.
The key to it was that the landlord itself had given mixed signals to their lawyer about how much rent was actually owed. And nobody at the law firm picked up the phone or sent an email and say, we don't understand, why are you saying here it's this much money and here it's this much money? And there were all kinds of red flags that they just ignored.
They ignored.
And the statute is very clear that you cannot sue somebody or claim a right to collect money from somebody that they don't owe. And if you
do... Now, this is a federal statute.
Federal law, right, which is enforceable in federal court. And it ended up settling very quickly after the court ruled in our favor on the liability issue for well over $100,000. And
that's great. I mean,
it's and the best part about it was that it got picked up in the news, so that it sent a message to other landlord lawyers that this is something you need to be more careful about. And the statute says that you're not liable for this kind of thing if you have procedures in place, reasonable procedures, to prevent this kind of thing from happening, and that you followed those procedures. And in this case, the court found they didn't have any procedures.
So what would such a procedure be, for example?
Well, that you have to be able to verify with the landlord and not just blindly accept that this is the rent. One thing you may want to do is ask the landlord to provide you with a lease, so that, for example, before you claim that you're entitled to legal fees in the case, you might want to say, show me the lease that says that, so that we're accurate on that. Because if they put in a claim for legal fees and there's no lease, that could be a violation also.
Sure.
So you just basically have to show that you were being careful. It's not a very high burden. But
you would think.
Yeah, but in housing court, the bar is set so low that you can fling just about anything, and get away with it, except this mechanism is something that I'm hopeful that other lawyers will use as well.
Have there been other cases since then?
I'm not aware of any others by other lawyers. I mean, we've had a few. We actually had a situation with the neighbor of the same tenant that we settled for over $100,000.
In the same building?
Same building, same landlord. She lived right below my client in the other case and had a very similar situation. Same law firm. So first we got her housing court case dismissed, and then we settled a FDCPA claim against them also for a lot of money. So they haven't really learned the lesson, I guess. It's going to take a few more of these.
You'd think that landlord law firms would take a cue here and
well, it's not that big a deal to learn how to do this right. And one landlord lawyer came up to me in housing court and said, "You have to teach us how to comply with this law." And I said, "Well, it's not that difficult. There are people out there who specialize in representing debt collectors who'd be happy to give you a seminar. Just get yourselves together, hire somebody, and take a seminar.
Have a CLE
really, exactly.
Seminar for your staff.
At least you can show you tried. But don't expect a plaintiff's lawyer or tenant's lawyer to teach you how to do that. That's certainly not a good way to go."
No, and it's it is kind of poetic justice in that so many of the landlord law firms they just think and they do in a sense run housing court.
They do. Yeah.
I mean, they basically sort of run the place in that most tenants come into housing court without an attorney. Almost every landlord does have an attorney. The same landlord attorneys are in court every day. They know all the court personnel, and they'll say, well, I have a problem today. I need to be somewhere at 11 o'clock. Can you make sure that this case gets called at such and such an hour?
Meanwhile, the tenant's been there since 9:30.
That's right, sitting there waiting until...
Often has to wait all day because that lawyer doesn't come back.
Right, and they really do sort of think they run the place, and they do run the place in a sense.
I've seen various statistics, but in Brooklyn, for example, I think the percentage of tenants that don't have a lawyer is well into the mid-90%, mid-90s at least. I don't know if it's any lower in Manhattan, but there's probably more
I think it's
lawyers.
Probably about the same everywhere because, first of all, even tenants who qualify for legal services or legal aid because their incomes are low don't necessarily have the ability to get an attorney from legal aid or legal services because
they can't take everybody.
They just can't take everybody, and they turn away most of the people who come to them for help because they've had cutbacks. They don't have enough lawyers. And
well, that's always been the case.
Yeah, it's always been the case, but it's worse now. Yeah. So, and then most tenants cannot afford to pay a private attorney because it's pretty expensive to hire an attorney, and then everybody in the middle, there's not much you can do.
On the other hand, on the other side of the coin, it's not very expensive for a landlord to hire a lawyer to bring a tenant to court on, say, for non-payment of rent, because they do it on such a mass volume basis. And one of the things we learned in this lawsuit, for example, we did some discovery and asked them, how much were you paid to bring this lawsuit? They were paid about $150.
Just for that one case?
Yes. Plus the $35 for the filing fee.
That's really assembly line.
And it's absolutely assembly line. And no lawyer's hands touches any of the papers until it's in front of a judge. No lawyer reviews the papers. No lawyer does anything. It's all done by staff.
A clerk goes down and files the
It's
petition.
done by their paralegals or staff. Plug the numbers and the address into the papers, into the boilerplate, and they do many, many numbers of these at once. So it is really mass production, and that's why 99% of landlords have a lawyer, because it's so cheap.
It's not that expensive.
And there's so many lawyers who will do that, and there's so much competition that it just is not expensive.
And in most cases, the case is not going to go to trial, so you're not going to have to pay. The landlord's not going to have to pay a lawyer, X dollars per hour to try the case.
Well, they don't even pay them by the hour. They pay them by the appearance.
By the appearance.
And most non-payment of rent cases get resolved on the first appearance. So it's cost-effective for the law firm to put 15 or 20 of those cases on in a day. If it's, it's probably a lot more than that, but they make out nicely. They run around settling all these cases with pre-written stipulations, and it's all done on a mass volume basis. Whereas tenant lawyers, even if you're a legal aid, you still deal with cases on a one-on-one basis, and you can't possibly do it on a mass basis like that.
Clearly not.
Because everybody's got different defenses, different circumstances, and it requires a fair amount more time to handle a case and to handle it properly. And a tenant who goes in without a lawyer, is not aware what the defenses are, is going to be browbeaten into signing a settlement agreement, whether they can live up to it or not.
Whether they even understand what they're signing.
Well, a lot of the judges do try and explain it, but the judges really can't advocate for the tenant. They can read it and ask if you understand it, but whether you actually do or not is something else. And
people are intimidated. If you've never been to court before, if you've never been in front of a judge before, people do get intimidated. And I've talked to tenants like this who said, I don't know why I signed that agreement. I don't know why I signed that stipulation. I shouldn't have. And then it's clear they just were frightened and browbeaten. So this guy approaches you in the hallway, says, can't we work something out? You don't even necessarily know that he's the attorney for the landlord. A lot of tenants assume that the person who's approaching them is somebody who works for the court. And who writes the stipulation, who writes the agreement? The landlord's attorney writes the stipulation. So people sign things that basically, in a non-payment case, you want some repairs. You agree to pay the rent by X date, and the landlord agrees to make the repairs by Y date, but there's no enforcement mechanism for you, the tenant.
You're lucky if it even says that. Often we'll say that the landlord agrees to, quote, inspect and repair as necessary.
Meaning I'll decide.
Right. I'll come in and take a look, and if I don't think it needs to be fixed, then I don't have to fix it. Because the as necessary is in the landlord's discretion. And that's the typical language.
It's really a disgrace. That the court even allows this to happen is really bad.
The real answer, and this is what's been percolating in city council lately, is civil Gideon, which is providing lawyers for people in housing court.
There is actually a campaign now. There's a whole citywide coalition to fight for this.
Yeah, nothing's going to really change until there is access to lawyers for housing court for tenants of any income. And not just any lawyers. You want lawyers who know what they're doing, who do this on a regular basis, and who know how to properly represent a tenant. I've seen situations where lawyers come in to a case representing a tenant who've never done it before, and sometimes they can make mistakes that make the problem much worse than if the tenant didn't have a lawyer.
It's like a dentist treating a stomachache or a...
Well, it carves the error in stone because when you try and undo the error, the judge says, well, you had a lawyer.
Right. Yeah, and it is ironic that if you are charged with a crime and you cannot afford a lawyer, the court will give you a lawyer.
Even the lowest level crime that doesn't even involve very much of a penalty, whereas homelessness is a real penalty.
If you're facing eviction, you're not entitled to a lawyer. It's really not fair. So what happens when people come to you and say, my landlord is offering me a buyout, what should I do? What typically kind of advice do you give people?
Well, one of the first things, after I've asked them the questions I had mentioned before about, do you have someplace to go? Do you want to leave?
You want to stay in New York City?
Right. You're going to go somewhere else. And once we get past all that, then I want to get into a sense of what I think a value is for that apartment in a buyout. Because there are so many variables, and you really have to examine as many of them as possible to get a good sense of what it's worth. And the first thing I ask is, are there market rate tenants in your building? And do you know how much rent they're paying? So if this tenant is paying $1,000, but for a similar sized apartment, the landlord's getting $4,500, then I see that there's a $3,500 spread right there. Now, of course, the $4,500 apartment is fully renovated, so the landlord's going to calculate that cost into their side of the equation. But $3,500 a month, if that's the spread, amounts to about $40,000 a year. And the general rule of thumb that I've seen people use is the spread times 36. So that would put that
3 years
buyout at a little over 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other variables. Is there a potential, if this is an elderly tenant, is there a potential successor living in the apartment, which is going to keep it out of the landlord's hands for many, many more years? Is it a building where the landlord is contemplating putting up a high-rise, tearing down the building?
Demolition.
A demolition situation, because obviously that's a huge value. If somebody is the last rent-controlled or rent-stabilized tenant in a building that's going to be torn down and replaced with something much bigger, there's a lot more money at stake. But
often the last tenant standing gets the biggest settlement.
That's
very
common.
That's just like,
But you really want to examine this from all angles, and then, but what I say to tenants, if the landlord hasn't offered you a buyout, it's better that you sit back and wait. If the landlord has said, we're interested, let us know if you're interested in this offer, then at least it's the landlord that's making the first move. And but I agree with what you said before, it really has to be negotiated by a lawyer, because tenants
it's just too dangerous.
They get taken advantage of in the agreement, and there's too much risk. It's way too much risk. And there's so many provisions that lawyers can negotiate that tenants wouldn't even think of. For example, I try to put in what's called a force majeure provision, which means that suppose the tenant says, I'll be out in 6 months, but 5 months down the road they get hit by a car or they get sick or something, they're in the hospital and they can't get out because of something, something out of their control. Then I will provide in the agreement that if they have a documented medical reason, or if there's an act of war or terrorism, whatever it is. I've even had people who can't move out because there's a blizzard and their moving truck didn't show up, so they needed more time. So you have to have a provision that allows for something out of the ordinary. And then I say to my client, look, you've agreed to be out in 6 months. Between you and me, be out in 5, because that way there's no question that you're not gonna have any problems if you're out a little bit earlier, and maybe we'll get that month back in rent. But it's always better to avoid having.
If you are late, they could. If you're late getting out, they could say we're not giving you the money.
Right, you could forfeit the money and get evicted. And the other thing is, it's my practice not to agree to allow my client to consent to a judgment in the agreement. A lot of landlords say, well, you have to have a judgment because if you don't move out, I want to be able to evict you right away. But that judgment is going to hurt the tenant
on your credit record.
On their credit record and on the blacklist and all that. So we've come up with strategies to get around that problem. And that's another reason why it's important to have a lawyer do this, because these are things that tenants often don't think about. And even if they did, they don't necessarily have the ability or the experience to get those provisions in the agreement.
A variation on this is where the landlord doesn't want to buy people out but wants to move somebody to a different apartment, and you then have possibly a change in regulatory status, which is also extremely dangerous for people who try to handle this themselves. So you may be in a rent-controlled apartment or rent-stabilized apartment, and he wants you to move to possibly even a different building or another apartment in the same building, and all of a sudden you discover after you've moved that the new apartment is a different regulatory status and you now have some problems.
Right.
So these are things that really people need to be very careful of and are very cognizant of, and I always believe in that that kind of situation you really do need the help of a good tenant lawyer.
And the bottom line in this is that what I say to tenants a lot is, if you are paying a very low rent, that's number one, and you like the apartment, you like the neighborhood, your kids are in the local schools, and you don't have any other place to go, and you don't want to leave, and you're rent regulated, then stay. Just say no. And be prepared to fend off attacks, bogus eviction claims or whatever, But if you have a lawyer, then you have a lot more protection from that sort of thing.
It's amazing to me how many tenants sort of implicitly think they're obligated to talk to the landlord, or they have to listen to what the landlord has to offer, when in fact they don't have to talk to them at all.
Particularly if they're not interested.
You can simply say, "I'm not interested.
Right.
Don't call me again. I'm not gonna
Right.
move." And it's but people again can get very intimidated because often people are afraid of the landlord, and I've seen cases where people really got kind of miserable just because of that kind of treatment at the hands of landlords who wouldn't stop calling and would knock on their door and say, "Why don't you take a buyout?"
Right. Well, now, of course, there are all these relocation specialists who do this work for the landlord.
Yeah.
And their job is basically...
Like the police officer who was written
and there are
up in the
certain management
newspapers.
companies that are known for being buyout relocation people. And they can be somewhat relentless also about, calling,
That's
writing.
their job.
Yes.
Yeah, their job is to pressure you to get you out.
I wouldn't be surprised if they get a commission for each apartment they empty.
And in fact, in the case of the Croman building, the Steve Croman, terrible landlord, this ex-police officer that he had hired, the Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, sent him a cease and desist letter telling him to stop doing this to Croman's tenants. And has that ever happened before?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
But I'm sure that there are many other relocation specialists out there who are doing this sort of thing.
There are a lot of them.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember once a landlord's lawyer sent me something that he probably didn't mean to send me, but he sent it to me, and it was a memo from a relocation specialist to the landlord. So it didn't involve the lawyer, but and what they had done is they had done a survey of all the rent-regulated tenants in the building, and they prepared a chart. And this was for somebody who was contemplating buying the building, which happened to be this landlord. And so they did a survey, and they showed, well, in this apartment you have an 84-year-old woman with nobody living with her. She has no family. In some of them, they even put in medical information that this person has cancer.
Oh, wow.
And this person has children in California. And they would just interview people. I don't know if they posed to somebody else, but they developed a whole dossier on the building so that the landlord would know which of the tenants were more vulnerable to pressure.
Or who weren't going to be there for very long.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's really kind of amazing.
Yeah, well, it's all about money.
It is all about money. Okay, and now we have a phone call. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hello, you're on the air.
My name is Melvin Walker, and I have a problem with, I have an apartment in a housing authority, Majeure, and my mail's been coming there for the last 40 years. My name's never been on the lease, and at the present time, they had just sent me a notice that they could not send me a lease. After 3 years, my mother had the apartment originally. She passed away. Then my sister took over the apartment. She passed away. And that's the only place that I have to go.
And you've lived there all this time?
Yes.
Do you know what the status of the apartment is? Is it rent stabilized or
I think
what?
you said housing authority.
You said housing authority?
Yes.
Oh, you did? Okay. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you right at the first. So it's public housing?
Yes.
All right. And now what's happening?
Well, they just sent me a notice that they couldn't grant me a lease for the apartment.
And did they state any grounds?
Well, I had went through the third-party grievance, and at the end of that, what the court reporter or whoever it was, she said because of my information, she couldn't grant, she couldn't see that me getting a lease from the housing authority, and that's where the case stands now.
Were you ever listed as an occupant in the apartment with the housing authority?
No, I never.
So your mother or your sister, neither one of them put your name down as an occupant?
No, because Well, I have some nephews, and they were in and out of. They were incarcerated quite often, and my mother had put their names down instead of mine.
Well, I think you probably need to see a lawyer. What's happening? Where are you right now? All they've done is send you a letter saying that they're not going to give you a lease.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm well. The third party grievance is over with.
Okay.
Now.
What neighborhood are we dealing with? Not the exact address, but what neighborhood?
Manhattan, Harlem.
Harlem. Okay. Have you tried going to legal services or legal aid?
Well, during the course of the hearing, I had informed the hearing officer that I had trouble recently with depression. So that's why they had gave me a lawyer. But I could have did without the lawyer because all he did was sit there. Really.
Where was the lawyer from?
I beg your pardon?
Where was that lawyer from?
I guess it was a law firm. I guess his name was Waxel. In fact, but I don't have it in front of me. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he asked a couple of questions, but he didn't convey my feelings as far as what I had told him. You know, He never conveyed that to the.
Were you asked to produce any kind of documentation to show that you had lived there?
Well, I have my W-2 forms from 1972 up until the time I stopped working.
Okay.
Coming to that address.
And it lists that address.
It's 8th Avenue, 2660 8th Avenue.
Okay. And how long ago did you stop working?
Well, I've been in September I'll be 75.
Right, but was there what's the gap between when those W-2 forms ended and now?
Well, I stopped working, I think, in 63 or 64, I'm not sure. No. I was 63 or 64 years old.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I think you need to see a lawyer. I really do.
Yeah, they haven't brought a court case against you yet, have they?
No, but the lawyer that they had appointed me, he had wrote me a letter saying that they were going to send me some kind of form, telling me that I have to leave the apartment.
I think you need to see legal aid or legal services. They have attorneys who deal with the housing authority all the time. It sounds like the attorney they assigned you was sort of a newcomer.
Well, I don't know why they would even assign somebody.
I've never heard of that.
Well, I don't think he was a housing attorney because he advised me to find someone that was more knowledgeable in housing.
Well, at least he was open about it.
I never heard of them. The
That's what I was saying before about having
crazy.
A lawyer who doesn't know what they're doing, causing more problems. Yeah, I think you really need to get somebody in legal aid or legal services.
Well, I took down these two numbers, 212-962-4798.
I'm not sure what that number is, but if you wait and look at the bottom of the screen,
yes,
you're going to get a number for Legal Aid Society. That's the central number.
I think I have it. 212-577-3300.
Right. Yes. That's the central number, and that's downtown. But they have an office on East 106th Street.
I know.
I think you need to.
I had went there early on in the process.
Well, go back.
I will.
Go back and tell them that you're being evicted, and the reason for that is that they can't take everyone who comes to them for help. So they tend to take the people who are in most danger of losing their homes. And you're at a stage here where you need some legal intervention, and it sounds like it's a complicated case, but it would have been helpful if your mother had put you on the paperwork.
Yes.
But
that's the bottom line.
But that doesn't mean you couldn't win. But I think you're going to have a really hard time winning this case without a good lawyer. And if legal aid can't help you, go to the Harlem Legal Services office.
I think I've tried that. Is that on 125th Street?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I've been there.
I think,
there.
Well,
I appreciate, I have the number.
You really do need to get a lawyer. I think that's the most important thing.
They notified me of that, but I haven't been served with any papers yet.
Good.
They probably told them to come back if you
they said until they serve you with papers.
Yeah. They said come back when you get served with papers.
Right,
they're not going to get involved unless he's been served.
Yeah. That's probably true.
Yeah.
So, well, like I said,
You know, there's also a community group called Community Voices Heard. They're on East 106th Street, and they work with tenants in public housing. If you call Met Council, we will give you the number for Community Voices Heard. And they work with tenants in public housing, so they can probably help you.
Well, do you have the number?
I don't have the number offhand, but if you
Call
give
the
Met Council a call, we will give you the number.
Is this the station? Yeah, I say Met Council or housing.
Yes, call that number, and we will. And you want the number for Community Voices Heard. It's a very excellent organization. They're located on East 106th Street, and they work specifically with tenants in public housing.
Good. Community Voices Heard.
Right.
I have the number.
Good luck.
Okay, good luck.
Good luck, and thank you again.
Okay, thanks. Good luck. Wow.
Yeah, success in the
toughie.
housing authority department is not easy if you're not on the
If you're not on the paperwork, yeah,
Right.
it's really hard because you have to prove you live there.
Right, and also the rent is keyed to who's
To the
living
household
there.
income.
Right.
That sounds like she wasn't working, but
Still, they want to know who
still
the
want to know.
occupants are.
Right. All right, now we have another call. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Okay. Here's my question. The building that I live in has gone condominium, and my lease is up in February of next year. And I am an employed individual, but I do make less than $200,000 a year. At least I have in the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what process should I follow in order to get a lease for 2 years as early as possible?
It's a rent-stabilized apartment.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well,
You want to explain the process?
sure. How much is your rent now?
The rent now, let's see now, 1 second, is $1,300.
Okay. Well, the threshold for, I think you're asking about high rent deregulation. The threshold is $2,500 a month, and you're nowhere near that.
Right.
So even though the building is being converted to a condominium, they still have to offer you a renewal lease. That doesn't change, and you still have a right to stay as a rent-stabilized tenant. During the window period, which is 90 to 150 days before the end of your lease, they're required to send you a renewal lease offer just like all previous years, and you will be given the opportunity to select a 1 or 2 year rent renewal at the applicable Rent Guidelines Board increases. So that shouldn't change. If they don't send you a renewal lease, there's 2 things you can do. One is to simply still pay the old rent, and then you won't have an increase until they do properly renew your lease. Or you can file a complaint with the state DHCR.
I'm sorry, the state?
The Division of Housing Community Renewal, or actually they have a different name
Can you
now.
give me the initials again, sir?
D, as in David, HCR.
We'll put it up on the screen.
Okay.
You can file a complaint.
It's the state agency that administers rent regulation.
Right. If you go to the rent regulation or the rent, I guess is it the rent stabilization page on their website?
Well, it's first of all, DHCR is still the name of the agency that runs rent regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a
DHCR.
DHCR. We're going to put it up on the screen.
Right.
Okay.
But they have a section on their website dealing with rent stabilization, and they have forms, and you can fill out, print out the form for failure to renew. And that's the complaint form you want to file with DHCR if they don't renew your lease when they're supposed to.
But if they don't renew your lease, you don't lose any rights, and they can't raise your rent. Now, the thing you're obviously worried about is high-income deregulation. And the threshold is that only when the legal rent, whether rent-controlled or rent-stabilized, reaches $2,500 a month, can the landlord require the tenant to go through an annual income certification process. So because your rent is so far below that threshold, you're not going to reach it probably in your lifetime.
Unless the RGB goes nuts.
Unless the Rent Guidelines Board goes nuts or the legislature lowers the threshold or something like that. But right now, the law is that they cannot inquire about your income. And the time they would only be able to do that is if your legal rent reached $2,500 a month.
While you're there.
While you're living there.
Okay.
So,
can I, I've been impressed with what I've been seeing on the air. Can I have the names of the two people? I don't see it on the screen. Who are giving
we'll be putting them up again, don't worry.
Okay.
But you're basically protected by the rent stabilization law. Tenants believe incorrectly that it's the lease that protects me when in fact it's the law.
Mm-hmm.
And if the landlord fails to offer you a renewal lease, you don't lose any rights whatsoever. I assume this is a non-eviction plan, not an eviction plan.
Yes, sir.
Well, if it's a non-eviction plan, you have the option of staying there as a rent-regulated tenant as long as you want to stay and as long as you pay the rent and don't do something, illegal like selling drugs out of your apartment.
Or primary residence, which is
or if you're living somewhere else and actually not using the apartment as your primary residence, as long as you follow the rules and pay the rent, you can stay there forever. And the fact that the building is converted to a condo or a co-op doesn't change that at all.
Right. One thing that could change, though, is after the conversion, somebody could buy your apartment as an investment and hope to entice you to leave. That happens often, that occupied apartments are purchased by investors who then try and throw some money at that tenant to give up their rights and leave. But you have the same rights to stay regardless of who your landlord is once you're rent stabilized, whether it's the current landlord or some investor.
I think I somehow would feel more comfortable if I actually had the lease instead of worrying about what's going to go on. Is there something that I can do?
Yeah, well, you can file the
complaint. As Jamie said, you can file a complaint with DHCR. You see what's on the screen right now?
Yes, DHCR.
Okay, you can file a complaint, which is called landlord's failure to renew lease. Mm-hmm. That's if they don't offer you a renewal lease.
But you can't do that before the lease expires.
Right.
Before the lease expires. It doesn't come a few months before the lease expires?
Well, they're required to offer it to you during the window period, which is 90 to 150 days before your lease expires.
Okay.
If they don't do that, then you can file the complaint, but wait until the window period ends, because that's when their time to do it runs.
They're not late if they haven't missed the window period.
Right.
Well, what is the window period?
The window period is 90 to 150 days before the end of your lease.
They have to wait till the 150 is over?
You have to wait until the 90 is over. It starts at 150 and it counts down to 90.
Okay.
And once you're at 89 days before the end of your lease, then they're late if they haven't renewed it.
I'm looking at the screen, but I don't see the names of the people who are talking, which would be useful.
My name is Michael McKee, and this is Jamie Fishman.
Which one is which?
I'm Michael McKee, and this is Jamie Fishman.
Is Michael with gray hair or Michael with the
Well,
brown?
we both have kind of gray hair.
Well, Jamie has hair.
I'm the one with hair.
Okay. Anyway, I want to thank you for your help.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Good luck.
Good luck to you. Bye-bye.
I don't know. This is very frustrating to me. Tenants who are afraid not to have a lease, and I'd like to get rid of lease renewals entirely and convert to statutory tenancy, like you have under rent control. Of course, the one thing you'd be giving up would be the Golub notice offense, and that's procedurally.
Well, the other thing you'd be giving up is the ability to recover legal fees if you don't have that first lease anymore.
Which people generally don't have their first lease.
Right, but rent-stabilized tenants who've been there for not that long generally, more often than not, will have that. I've had rent-control tenants who have a lease from the 40s.
I know. It is really amazing. Some people are super well organized, and they have it all in files, very well organized.
And what I tell them to do, if they have a lease that's more than 50 years old, take it to Kinko's and have it laminated, and then put it in a safe deposit box.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing to see a tenant like that. But once in a while, you run into a tenant who's got records going all the way back.
Right.
And they've got everything. Most people can't even find their current lease, let alone their original lease.
Can't find my car keys sometimes.
All right, now we have another call. Hello?
Yes,
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. This is in reference to what you were speaking about earlier about, buyouts. Right now, I'm only one of two people in the building of a brownstone on the Upper West Side. I'm 40 years old. I'm on jury. The landlord's negotiating with my neighbor to get him out, and then he'll approach me. He keeps on saying, we have to talk about, what you want to be bought out. The question I have is, for example, I'm going to be going away in the winter for 3 months. Does the landlord have a right to just say, I want to come into your apartment?
And do what?
It depends.
Basically, I just think that most likely he just wants to harass me, because of the fact that if he finds out I'm away, that, give me a hard time, we have to get access to your apartment. It's like, what's the law about getting access to an apartment?
The law is that landlords are entitled to access on reasonable notice, which is generally 24 to 48 hours, unless it's an emergency, like a pipe has burst and the water is cascading to the apartment below.
Right.
But other than that, they're required to give advance notice.
And it has to be at a reasonable hour.
Yes, it can't be in the middle of the night. It can't be, when people are eating dinner, or sleeping, whatever. So it's a question of reasonableness.
And there's specific reasons that they're allowed to come into your apartment to inspect for repairs, to make a repair, to show the apartment to a potential purchaser, like if they're trying to sell the building.
But what happens if you're on vacation?
I'm sorry?
Well, what happens if you're on vacation?
Well, they're not allowed to go in if you're not there unless it's an emergency.
Right.
And if you're not there to get the request for the application. Do they have a key, by the way?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, then they're going to have a hard time getting in if you're not there unless they change the lock.
All right.
Now, you have a right, you have an absolute right to go away on vacation.
Right.
And if you're expecting trouble, like if you're expecting, that they might try something cute, you might want to get a friend or a neighbor who will, take care of your mail and stuff like that while you're gone.
Right.
And also, how are you planning on paying the rent while you're gone?
I have checks written out, and I have my sister mail them each month, so that I don't want them being mailed from another state.
And how long are you going to be away?
3 months.
Just 3 months. 3 months. I know that you're only allowed to go, I think, 6 months is the max, I think.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but generally speaking, you should be living in the apartment for at least 6 months of the year.
Yeah, that's
in
no
order
problem.
to maintain it as your primary residence.
No, it is, and
there are exceptions, like if you're away, nursing a sick relative or something like that, or if you're away on business, like an actor on tour.
Right.
But absent some exception like that, it's a good idea to be in the apartment at least 6 months of the year.
All right.
If I were going away for 3 months and I was the last person in the brownstone, I would make sure I had somebody checking the mail and checking under the door.
Can you have somebody stay there while you're gone?
That might be a little difficult. But but it's going to be. It might be the point that when I go away, that I'll be the only person in the building, and then they will want to deal with me about trying to buy me out.
Right. Well, you should be aware.
Did you hear what we talked about earlier?
Yes, I had. Yes, I did.
Don't handle it yourself. Get a good tenant attorney.
I have one of the attorneys that was on your program already.
Okay. All right.
Good.
And what about your neighbor, the one they're trying to negotiate with? Is he represented by an attorney?
I've attempted to tell him that, but unfortunately he doesn't listen to my advice in reference to that. I've told him many times, do not do it yourself. Speak to an attorney. But, you can only do so much.
Right.
Some people don't listen.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for the information.
Well, and be careful when you go away.
Actually, I'm even interested in maybe getting security cameras for my apartment, just in case.
Well, more importantly, have somebody check the mail, check your door in case
check under the door,
in case
on
papers
the door.
get put on your door.
Right.
Landlords have been known to do all kinds of nefarious things to harass people.
If they know you're going away, they will likely try to sue you or something like that and serve you papers, and hoping you won't know about it and you won't answer. For example.
Yes.
Actually, I know that from a friend, and I know that I try to avoid the landlord knowing that I'm going away.
Well, does the landlord live in the building?
No.
Or is there a super?
No.
So is there somebody there who's going to notice you're gone?
Other than maybe seeing me sometimes, no.
Okay. And are there,
right.
has the landlord put cameras in the building?
No, there's no cameras here.
Or at least none that you've seen.
I hope
they're,
not.
Right.
sometimes they're hidden.
Anyway, that's the story, and it sounds like you have a pretty good idea about what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Yes, and thanks to your program. I do appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for watching.
Have a good evening.
Good
now.
luck.
Thank you. Bye.
So we're out of time.
Wow. It
Went fast, huh?
Flies by.
Yeah. Very interesting conversation about buyouts and about suing landlords for misconduct.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You've been watching Tenant Action Today. We're on every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. If you want to get involved in the fight to preserve and strengthen our rent laws, please get in touch with Met Council on Housing. The rent laws are up for renewal in Albany next June, only 10 months away. Thanks for watching, and please tune in again next week.